Hi. There's a lot of you here. I'm Sarah. I'm going to moderate for Maggie and Kashana, who I will make sure does most of the talking. I think to start, I'm just going to ask an actual question, but do you guys want to just tell the audience a little bit about like where you came from? Like how you got here? Kashana, you want to start?
Oh, like how we started writing and stuff?
Where you came from, like to get here today.
Oh, to get here today, a plane from LA, but like existentially, from when I started writing books as a 10-year-old, I had no idea what sex was, but I knew that you needed it in a book. And so I wrote and illustrated it was a detective novel, and I also came from like a conservative religious family, and so they were just like, what is this? It got thrown out. But then I learned I liked writing books, and so I kept going. And then I wrote a book about Brooklyn survivalists who have a bunker in their backyard and all that. That came out a couple years ago. And the book I'm going to talk about today is fun. It's about a woman who realizes she's never going to pay back her student loans unless she stages a heist. And she's stalked by this kind of paramilitary-ish force called the Debt Police. And yeah, I know. And this book came out 2 weeks after they started doing ICE raids. And so it was really weird to have written a book about paramilitaries in 2025 in the United States. But it's fun. They're also into wellness. They wear turquoise. They have uniforms. You can win a car like the Mary Kay ladies. It's not doom and gloom.
I'm Maggie. I came from South Bend, Indiana via plane, and I was congested and worried that maybe my eardrums were going to rupture on the flight, but I'm here, and I'm so happy to see everyone. My mom was a public librarian for 30 years, so that's kind of how I got into reading. And I was, that kid who loved Lord of the Rings so much that I had a little ring that I wore around my neck, and was very cool, and had a lot of friends. Writing came to me a little bit. I wrote throughout my life, but I always thought I was going to have a job in science, and I just realized it wasn't going to work out, and so I stayed in grad school for 8 years, and now I'm here, and I'm so excited to be sharing my debut novel, Blob, a love story. It's about a woman who finds kind of an amorphous gel-like thing outside of a drag club, takes it home, and kind of realizes that she can form it into her perfect partner. And she's also dealing with a breakup, having dropped out of college, and all of that, and just channeling all of that angst into another person that is a blob man. And so that's what the novel's about.
They're both hilarious. And entirely different. Like, I've never read about a debt police or a sentient blob in that way. And I think that one of the things I'm really curious is, what inspired these? What inspired the debt police? What inspired you to be like, a blob that we can mold into a perfect man? Maggie, do you want to start?
Yeah. I was really just perplexed by human connection and human relationships at the time. And I was also living in a basement apartment, and I was writing it during COVID, and I was just thinking a lot about loneliness and really feeling that isolation and kind of how do we connect with folks, how do we create relationships that feel lasting. And also, I feel like such a big issue in relationships is control. And so if you could create someone that you could totally control, or in some ways have form into your perfect person, how could that go awry? So that's where it came from. It started off as a 10-page short story, and then was a 10-minute play that was very chaotic and was only performed once. And then it became a novel. Yeah.
That's awesome.
The Debt Police came from 3 things. number one in this country, and how they love having police, and how they love having, like, hiring more police every year and expanding the police forces, and then expanding what the police forces do, which I feel like has kind of metastasized even recently. Now all of a sudden, like, the National Guard are armed. What is up with that? We didn't have that like 6 months ago. Just under the guise of safety, you know? And so there was a lot of, so is this making us safe? No, I don't think so. That's the first strand of the debt police, just America's reliance on over-policing. The second one is, so I'm an NFL fan. I am a Packers fan.
One person.
And I wrote a lot of this book during a period when the number one thing in my life was just hating Aaron Rodgers. And so he had stopped winning. He was telling us a lot about darkness retreats and wellness. He was not like getting the COVID shot. He was being immunized with whatever his like herbalist was giving him. He wouldn't shut up about things that had nothing to do with being part of the Green Bay Packers. I thought, but the thing about the wellness folks is they've gotten policey lately, you know? Like they are kind of policey. Like RFK is all like, maybe we'll send autistic people to the organic fruit camps or whatever. And so I was like, I grew up as my brother is autistic. The anti-vaxxers have been around since like the 90s. They have always been like, maybe we will just put things in our body from Whole Foods and stay pure. They've been doing this forever. And so a combination of all of those things, but mostly Aaron Rodgers, is why the debt police are people who are obsessed with wellness. They think getting rid of debt is a form of purity. They talk about Sedona. They talk about crystals. They talk about horoscopes. They, while they're harassing you. They talk about all of this wellness stuff, all this astrology stuff. They're basically like if Aaron Rodgers didn't shut up, but in a police form where the police wore terrible turquoise uniforms. And the turquoise uniforms are from, so my mom was not quite a Mary Kay lady, but she got all the catalogs when I was younger, and I was like, oh, well, obviously you wear all that makeup and then you look fine, right? Like you could just order everything from the catalog and then you're pretty. But before I learned that it didn't work that way, I got obsessed. I'm like, you could get a pink Cadillac, you can like work your way all the way up the chain. So the debt police, they have turquoise uniforms that are based on how many people they've harassed and how much money they've confiscated from people. And so over the course of the book, they become more and more turquoise, and you can even get all the way up to a turquoise car. So over-policing Aaron Rodgers, the Mary Kay ladies.
Can I get a show of hands of how many of you have read these books? Okay, cool. So I don't have too many like spoilers, but I just want to be like, who knows what we're talking about? Okay, so something's a little funny here. Obviously, your books are, if you can't tell, very funny. And that's the obvious tie-in. But there's some other tie-ins in your books, which I'd say race is a big one. Jada is Black, Vi is half Taiwanese, and kind of what it's like to be a woman of color in America. And in some ways, a little bit about depression, I feel like, in your book. And I wanted, why use humor as an entry point to talk about race and racism and depression? Shauna, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Honestly, I think there's a lot about the Black experience in America that's absurdist and funny, that a lot of the rules that we have around race and a lot of the ways in which we interact with what race means are just funny. Like, they just don't make any sense in a way that I consider to be hilarious. And so I thought humor was a great way to talk about these things that inherently don't make any sense and are sometimes funny. My main character is failing out of all of the systems that she thought were going to make her a successful and stable person. College didn't quite work, her career didn't quite work, even retail didn't quite work. And I think this is common. Just a lot of us are just like, okay, so that fifth career, what are we gonna do? And there's something even funny in that too. But Black women also have the most student loan debt, are the most educated sub-demo in the United States. Are the biggest readers, actually, I think, by percentage, too. And just, yeah, so I wanted to talk about these super educated people who had just sort of like dived into the empty pool, because there is something to me that's funny and also depressing, but also funny about just going through that level of education and still sort of spinning your wheels.
100%.
Yeah, I didn't know my novel was funny, so I'm surprised and happy to be here. I'm not a comedy writer. Your novel is so funny. So yeah, I think I just started writing. I think I just started writing, and I think the first novel, your debut, oftentimes it comes from lived experience. And I think my novel, growing up Taiwanese American in the Midwest, it's just a very surreal kind of experience when you don't, now I live in South Bend, and I'm one of 1,000 Asians who live in the city. So sometimes I look at another Asian American person, and I'm like, okay. We're 2 of the 1,000. So it's just very specific, and so it's just incredible to see people like connecting with that experience, and the absurdity of it and the strangeness of it. But yeah, I think the novel started out like in a very dark place in COVID and in the basement apartment, and Vi's kind of this really self-sabotaging character. Who is very unlikable. Those unlikable women, I know that gets tossed out so much, right? But I loved the contradictions there in her character, that she can observe other people really well, but not really observe herself particularly well. And I think that there's some humor in that. And then I think the blob, the conceit, perhaps has some humor to it. But yeah, I think just my way of maybe looking at the world came through, and I'm happy that it wasn't terribly just depressing. I'm glad there's some humor in there that y'all were able to find.
I thought it was very funny. I mean, the darkness is there, but I think in both of your books, it makes it so much more accessible. Like humor has this way of being like, oh, I'm laughing with you, so therefore I can follow along and be like, oh, now I'm understanding you. And I think that I think you get into Jada and Vi really well because they're funny. Self-deprecating funny in Vi's case, maybe, but they're funny. And I think, neither one of you wrote these books knowing that we'd be exactly where we are in 2025 today. But it does make me think, in reading them both, how they felt kind of relevant and how I find humor to be important. But I kind of want to hear, what role do you think humor can play right now in helping us with all of motions?
Yeah, it's hard, especially at this time when so many atrocities are happening, so many injustices. And I think art in general, I think, has the ability to comfort, to entertain, to educate, to do all of those things, to kind of transcend. And it's not going to fix all of our problems, but I've found there's, I think, more than ever, to find that balance as a reader, between, I have a young baby, 5-month-old daughter, and so giving birth to her in this time, I think, kind of to find that, even just like an act of hope and resistance in the fact that I have hope in her in the future.
Yeah.
And so I think humor can play a good role in that. Yeah.
Love that. No.
Oh, humor's keeping me alive.
Real.
I am not one of those people who can just get up and raw dog the news and feel, deeply serious about it to the point where I get depressed and I'm able to continue. I grew up in a gallows humor house. My parents thought the solution to all of their problems was to put on another cassette tape of stand-up. I didn't make this connection for decades. I was not an 11-year-old who told jokes. But they honestly, something would happen, and then all of a sudden we would be driving in the car, and like I said, they're conservative and religious, and the only time you could swear was when you were quoting Prince or you were quoting stand-up sets. So you couldn't swear, but you could do the Robin Williams, the baby who swears bit. Because of them, I felt like humor brought people together, that it helped you emotionally get through depressing circumstances by making it so you didn't want to dive into the concrete-filled pool today. And just but yeah, I associate humor with warmth and loving and community. It's so much more than just a joke. If somebody makes you laugh, you've all had this communal experience together, and it's nice, and it makes you feel good inside. Like, I feel like that's the role of it. And so when I write a book that is full of jokes, I'm hoping that, you pick it up and you have like a little emotional experience and you feel a little connected to the characters in the book, and then you feel a little bit more connected to the human experience of laughing at something.
Yeah.
Like, I think humor can bring us together. There is so much trying to pull us apart right now. There are so many people who are just like, well, obviously you should be in little separate boxes because of your gender or your race or your sexual orientation and whatever. But having like studied abroad in Spain, having done a lot of traveling, one thing that is uniquely American is our sense of humor. It really brings us together, and we don't laugh at the same things other people do. And I would never want to live anyplace else because I don't want to know how their greeting cards work. And because they're not funny. And I just, I hope that we can look towards this, to humor as an excuse to come together, as an excuse to understand that we have something in common, as a thing that makes us uniquely American in the style of our humor, and something that, keeps us going. I think that's the role humor can play today.
That really tees me up for the other question that I had about like your books, which, again, very funny, very accessible, talks about some big stuff, but is also, they both have like a pretty emotional punch. Like by the end, I was like, I teared up in the last pages of the paperback as someone who's had student loans. Me and all of you. I was like, wait, I want to follow Vi more. Like, when the book ends, you're like, I'm having this really emotional response. And I think you get there because of that humor, which has brought us there. But also, what do you hope when I'm closing that book, what do you hope everyone takes with them at the end of your books? Do you want to start?
Sure. I wanted to write a book about messy Black women who were not perfect and were not like subscribing to all of the things that we expect Black women to do, but who still find a happy outcome from themselves and really could be said to have won against the circumstances in their life that are the depressing reasons for the cause of the book. If you read the Payback, what I want you to take away from it is you do not have to be perfect to get what you want. You don't have to be an unflawed person who is always doing the right thing. My girls are basically outlaws. If this was the 1850s, they would be six-shooters. I don't know how many Black women in fiction get to do that. But I just think, in general, also there's this big effort to declare people criminals, right? Who aren't doing anything. Oh, you're just walking down the street. Oh, you're just being Latino or Black or Asian or non-white or gay. What if we don't see each other both in terms of criminality or as bad people? What if it's okay to be messy and we can still be messy people and get what we want?
I love that. Yeah, I think something I've learned from my readers is that Vi, is also extremely flawed, has all of these issues, depression. You can keep naming mental health illnesses, but I think her story, and it's very cliche, is one about self-love and about how can we stop relying on other people to give us kind of an internal sense of validation. And the whole book is really about that journey, and is it possible for people to change? And I think a younger me probably would have said no. And so throughout the course of actually writing the book, was I able to kind of grapple with that. And my dissertation director, who saw an early draft of it, and I thank her in the acknowledgments, because she was like, Maggie, you're so hard on this character. Like, you're so hard on Vi, and you're so hard on yourself. Like, what does it mean to kind of, spoiler, give somewhat of a hopeful ending for her? And what does it mean for us to kind of have hope for ourselves and our growth?
It may be a spoiler, but these books won't make you depressed in this period of time. It actually give you hope if you haven't read them. That's what I also really appreciated about them, is they're messy women getting to grow and change and maybe reach what they get to deserve. Maggie, this is your debut. It came out at the end of January. What's it like to be a novelist?
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Welcome.
I was I 8 months pregnant when the book came out, so I felt like it took some pressure off. I was growing a blob. I was publishing a blog.
Accurate.
And so I was like, you know what? If it doesn't do well, it's okay. I have a baby. Everything's gonna be fine. So highly recommend that as a strategy to take your mind off of the success or lack thereof. No, I felt really. It's been wonderful to like just hear people reading and responding to it, especially since it's such a specific experience being half Taiwanese, growing up in a college town in the Midwest, and then hearing other people connect to it has been like that. The specificity kind of doesn't throw people off, but rather brings people in. I think that's incredible, and yeah, it was a dream of mine since I was a kid, so it's been wonderful.
I mean, congratulations. It's a huge accomplishment. And Kashana, The Payback is your second novel. Your debut came out in 2023. As someone who's never written a single novel, I have to imagine that the only thing harder to write than a debut is the second. And kind of how did you do a second novel? How did you move on? How did you say, I'm gonna do this?
Well, I mean, it's easier when you have a burning hatred of the student loan industry. You know, I mean, the threatening phone calls made this book possible. You have to have an emotional connection to 300 pages of novel that you carry with you for months and months and months. And so I joke about the student loan industry hatred thing, but I don't. It was a great thing to hold on to feel emotional about for surprisingly only 6 months of drafting after I threw out 400 pages of character study. It didn't take any time at all. And once they sounded right. But it's funny because sophomore novels are supposed to be terrible, except like it doesn't feel so bad when you go out there and everybody likes your novel. I actually feel like I've had a really weird sophomore novel experience. This is stop 7 on my tour. I didn't know people toured on sophomore novels. Everybody is just like, oh my God, this is a book that really suits our current moment. I thought sophomore novels were all dropped into a pit somewhere. Everybody's just like, well, they'll hate it. Like your debut is when you're shiny and fresh and all that. But continuing is amazing. To get over the debut novel hurdle and to come out the other side and go, they still want me to publish it, is one of the best feelings in the world. I've been talking to the crew, I have something else that I'm writing, they're even pumped about that. I'm like, the second novel to me is when you're a novelist. You survive this more than once, and you have like a little tiny body of work. That is an amazing feeling. I've wanted to be a novelist, I think I mentioned this earlier, since I was 10 years old. This has always been my dream. I was one of those live in the library kids. I was glued to my checkout pile. This has always been the dream. And I can't believe that I get to be here, and I can't believe that all of you are here. And I can't believe that they invited me to this. It's just, it's a bunch of new wonders every day.
I'm gonna give you the next one on that as well then, of like, if I didn't ask about fashion in this, it would be just a missed opportunity for me. One of the things I loved, I was writing all over your book. It's covered in pen mark. So much fashion. Where does that passion come from? And will we see more fashion in your next book? Which is my sneaky way of asking you to talk to us about your next book as well.
Okay, so I grew up, of course, with the typical background in fashion that people do. I was a really snotty Wisconsinite who thought that we could do better when we put shirts on in the morning. And I grew up in an era where people were wearing shirts that said work is a 4-letter word and stuff. And but I would hide out in the library. I couldn't afford to buy books. I couldn't afford to buy magazines. I come from a working class family. And so I would piece through people's completely beaten up issues of Vogue at my local library, and I would go, see, you can do better. People can dress better. I went on to work at, the fashion baby's favorite store, JCPenney, for 6 years. And in that time, I became like the character in my book. I could look at you and go, you have a 36-inch bust, you have a 27-inch waist, you have a 36-inch hips, you're probably a size 4 through 6, your shoe size is like 8. Your sunglasses shouldn't be bigger than about 50 millimeters, otherwise terrible things are gonna happen to you. I took all of this Wisconsinite unfashionable anguish and became like a monster on the JCPenney sales floor. And yeah, I was insane. I signed more people up for credit cards than I think they thought was possible. I sold so many clothes. I worked on commission, just like my girl does in the book, Jada, and I poured so much money out of a part-time job that they ended up trying to structure the job away from all the extra money you could make. Like, no, I came through and busted through the sales records in a year, and they were just like, we're never going to let anybody earn this much money on the side again. And then I went on to intern at Kenneth Cole, where they played Gwen Stefani every day, and everyone smoked on the curb, and I was like, this is fashion. I mean, this isn't fashion. Like, you can do better than Kenneth Cole, but like, I thought these were the coolest people on earth. We had actual models. They would like actually try on things. I worked in the legal department. I was a 2L who was okaying all the copyrights, but like under supervision. But I thought I was in fashion. I walked past the clothes. And so every morning on my way, I wore corduroys. I was square. I was a lawyer to be. But I walked past them and I was like, this is it. We're doing it. We are part of fashion. And then on The Daily Show, I ended up hanging out with the costume designer all day because they let me write an ad about smoking in black neighborhoods. And she was like, so we get to talk. I don't know how many of you know who Roy Wood Jr. is. He was the guy who was in this ad. And I was like, Roy, I'm going to dress you up like a cigarette. It was about smoking in black neighborhoods and how like the cigarette companies like to come in and advertise in our neighborhoods. And I was like, you're gonna wear a suit. It was 95 degrees in Harlem on the day we shot this. But he had the perfect brown suit on. And I remember thinking, as a person who has cared about fashion since I was like 10 years old, this is like the pinnacle. I can dress Roy Wood Jr. and he can be like, I can't believe you did this to me. And we can shoot this ad in Harlem. I think we got nominated for some sort of award. It was awesome. And I can outfit someone in a place where like a ton of people are going to see it. So lifelong obsession.
I love it. I love it so much.
Amazing.
Maggie, your next book that I saw on your Instagram is horror inspired, which honestly doesn't seem like that big of a jump from a sentient blob. Like it seems pretty the next step down or up. But what can you tell us about that turn and anything else you can say about the novel?
Yeah, I feel like it's jinxing it to keep talking about it, but I've talked about it on every interview I've ever done. And so now if it doesn't come out,
You
will
can't put
know
it on social media.
that I have failed to write this horror-inspired novel. Well, I was living in Athens, Georgia for 2 years, and I feel like Georgia's kind of haunted, especially University of Georgia. And we were feeding feral cats. So we had like a feral cat colony, as you do when you live in Georgia. We had a feral cat colony outside of our apartment, and we fed them every night. And so I was just thinking about, and my partner loves horror movies. The Shining makes a brief kind of note in Blob, and kind of Frankenstein. You can see that there's some horror kind of running through Blob. But yeah, I also read The Changeling by Victor LaValle, and I love the idea of horror being a vehicle to talk about difficult things. I
Yeah.
love Jordan Peele's films. I love the idea of like race and horror and humor kind of all being combined. So if you don't see a cat horror novel from me, these are all the percolating ideas. I've written like 100 pages, so we'll see. And yeah, that's kind of, not to give too much away, but there was like a speculative element in which the cats kind of can walk into other worlds.
Okay.
I forgot to answer. Okay.
Don't worry, I was going to come back to you.
So what if two black women in 1940 Chicago were like The Godfather is the next book. They've made all their money on this secret lottery game that my dad somehow knows a lot about. So I don't know if we have family secrets. That's the perspective that this is written from, about how legal the income was in our family or not. But they are the richest women in Chicago, and they're doing great. The only people who oppose them are the city of Chicago cops, the FBI, the remnants of the post-Al Capone outfit. They were bootleggers, and then the bootlegging prohibition era ended, and so they were like, well, who's still making money in Chicago? Black people, and their underground lottery. Why don't we go take that? And so they went to war, which is when this book is set in the 40s, with the black people who were keeping the proceeds from our own underground lottery system. The Illinois lottery ended up legalizing all this in 1973. It is Pick 3, which is basically their game, is still the lottery today, and it's still the lottery in a lot of jurisdictions, and it was invented by this thing called policy in Chicago, or the numbers. And each other, because the FBI makes one of them a snitch. And so everyone is at war with everyone else in 1940s gangster Chicago. There is some fashion, because, I mean, fashion is important when they wouldn't call themselves gangsters. They don't see themselves as being like the Italian mob. They don't want to kill people. But if they have to practice self-defense for their community, they're willing to do that. And fashion ends up playing a fairly large part in the book, because how you appear as a member of the underground economy in public is quite key.
I think fashion, that's one of the reasons why fashion is such a fascinating subject, because it is how you code switch, and it's how you fit into the world and pass or don't pass or whatever you're trying to look for. So that makes sense to me. One of my favorite things about talking to writers, especially after I've read their books, is hearing the bits about you that I'm like, oh, I see how that ended up in, I see where that is in your book. And I love that. And as a reader, I'm always really, and a small writer, but like, I'm always really interested in the perspective when people choose to write from like first person or third person, and there's those crazy people who can do second person. But first person, what made you kind of choose that perspective for your protagonist, and how much of you do you think is in your protagonist or your side characters? Maggie, you can start.
Yeah, first person always has felt really comfortable to me, because I'm so interested in like that distance between what the narrator, how the narrator presents themselves versus kind of what the reader knows about the narrator. I'm interested in that unreliability, basically. And so that was really important to me. And Vi, as her own kind of self-image, is questioned and poked at throughout the novel. Yeah, in terms of how much of Vi is in me, as I said, I feel like the debut kind of has been living within me for a really long time. So a lot of those lived experience details, I was telling you earlier, my brother was like, Maggie, why couldn't you be more creative? Why couldn't you make some stuff up? Like, all of these details are just details like that exist. If you've ever been to Champaign, Illinois, or Bloomington, Indiana, you might, go to Kopi Cafe, or, some of the details are there that are from me. But I would say the characters, I think, Larry David said that his character on Curb Your Enthusiasm is just like really heightened, like the most heightened version of himself. Like, you take your flaws and you just turn them up to 10. And I feel like Vi kind of has that, where it's all kind of that insecurity and snarkiness. But what if I said aloud everything I was thinking and kind of turned that up to 10? So yeah.
Your brother also, just from that one quote, I'm like, that kind of sounds like the brother in the you can tell him I said that. Shauna, how about you?
I think I've done something that it's hard to get away with. I think I have 2 vaguely autobiographical novels. I have lived 10 lives, though, like a cat, and so there's a lot to pick from. But the first person versus third person is always a great question. My first book is in third person because that's what voice worked. That's how I determine it. The payback is in first person because that's the voice that worked. I wrote, like I mentioned earlier, 435 pages that are not in this book because none of the characters sounded correct in them. The voice is everything. When I hit the voice, the actual drafting of the draft is not painful at all because I know what they're supposed to sound like, and they start talking to me and all that good stuff. Jada was a really hard character to nail. I didn't know where she should sit on the scale of how messy people are. She's me in the sense that she worked retail. She's not me in the sense that I am such a scaredy cat. There are so many illegal things being done in this book, and I would never do any of them. I'm a good girl, and it was boring. But she was like, yeah, kind of like what Maggie said. I'm like, what if I took all these things that I'd thought about or fantasized about and turned them up to 10? I knew that Jada was Jada after I'd written hundreds of pages of what Jada would sound like. When there was a sentence and it was, I am an assassin, but for clothes. After she goes around like pointing out people's sizes and dimensions and stuff for a while, like she just starts spitting numbers out and starts outfitting people in the right clothes. Yeah, she compares all that to being an assassin. I'm like, this is it. This is my main character. This is a sentence I cannot live without in my life. This is what she sounds like.
That's amazing. I keep being like, we're around time. I'm kind of curious about your writing processes. Like what is it like to write a novel, which isn't something that sounds very easy to the rest of us? Maggie, do you want to start? Kashana? Yeah. You guys, you tell me who wants to start.
I actually took a year off of writing to do my PhD exam, so I read for a full year. I read 100 books, 50 in speculative fiction and 50 in Asian American literature. And so I just spent that time reading, and it was amazing. And then as soon as I took my exams, it was spring of 2020, so a lot of things were happening. I just felt like writing. And so I think it had kind of been building up in me. I also took a screenwriting course. I highly recommend if you kind of get outside of your genre, you can, like a lot of things can start to percolate. So I took I taught a screenwriting course because there was no one in our college who had ever done screenwriting, and I had also never done screenwriting. So anyway, I taught a screenwriting course that I was not qualified to teach. And so I had to learn some screenwriting. And I had never really nailed plot. I was writing short stories, these character studies, and doing kind of more of that workshop kind of fiction. And then watching so many films, I was like, okay, and like learning the plot structure and the acts and the turning points. I just very meticulously kind of plotted that out. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna write for 2 hours every day and see what happens. And so after I gave myself these little chunks, and I couldn't look at them after I had written them. And then that's kind of just how it came to be, because I feel like once I start overthinking things, it's never good.
Never good. That's 100% agree.
I'm with Maggie. I think TV helped. TV helped move me along. You don't have a lot of space in TV. Sometimes you have to establish a character in like a couple of sentences and one stage direction, and then there you are, right? That should be a fully fledged, breathing, living, inhabitable person. But it's nice to be able to move things along in fiction. I don't like feeling bored, and so I appreciate TV speeding up my internal clock a lot. But in general, I write until the person sounds like a person who I want to spend 300 pages with, and then I write the 300 pages. And sometimes this takes forever, but it's okay. There's apparently a whole club of us. I've talked to other authors who are just like, sometimes it takes 500 pages of nonsense until you get to what the voice is like, because you have to want to live with them. And so I need to find a person I can live with in the midst of all this background material.
How many hours do you spend a day writing?
During the drafting people who don't work out phase, like 8. Oh man, it's like the worst. Once I have something and I know where I'm going, I can get away with as little as 1 hour, or a little two, because I know where I'm going. I can do like 1,000 words in an hour once I know what people sound like.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. There's a big thing happening, I feel like, in the world of writers is this talk about music when you're writing. Everyone's got a playlist today. I first figured it out with, I'm a big fantasy fan. I've read a lot of Fourth Wing. Rebecca Yarros loves to be like, this is my playlist. It's a lot of Taylor Swift. You have a playlist on one of the things I read. I read a lot of stuff. There's so much music in your book. And I'm just really curious about, like, you've already named TV and movies as being a big inspiration. What role does music play in inspiring your work?
The payback didn't work until I started listening to the Bobby Brown album, Don't Be Cruel, on repeat. This is one of the first albums I kind of remember from childhood. I would sit around in the backseat of my parents' car, and they didn't like Bobby Brown's next album. And neither did anyone on the radio. They would openly diss it. Like, one of my first memories as a child is listening to, like, something off of Bobby Brown's, like, third album, I think it is, and them going, well, this is terrible. Let's go back to Don't Be Cruel. But the thing about Don't Be Cruel is the cover art, Bobby is like 20, and he's got on shoulders that are like their own separate person. They're so shoulder padded, and he's got like this, and it's a double-breasted suit. Like, it's just the most 80s thing that had ever been invented. In the book, Jada makes friends with this fashion designer who was huge in the 80s. Because I got into thinking, well, who would design this suit? And that kind of centered the book, because I'm like, how did you get kicked out of fashion? What would retail mean for her that's comforting? Oh, she can hang out with this guy who used to design power suits. They can feel exiled to the mall together. And but that's how it came about, through Bobby Brown. There's so much music in the book. Jada is a consummate soundtracker. She loves disco. She loves Gucci Mane. She
hates punk.
She absolutely cannot stand punk. Her friend is in this punk band called the Donner Party. And she has like all sorts of different ways to compare them to various types of noises she does not like. Because she's like, I'm a supportive friend, but there are limits. And yeah, but because she cares about she's a Peter Gabriel freak. She spends a lot of time like thinking about him and Phil Collins and 80s drumming. She likes like she's an obsessive. And the music she's obsessive about fashion, and then she's equally obsessive about music. I love her because obsessive characters are the best. Like, people who feel very strongly about the world and their place in it and the things that they love. And yeah, the music is she spends just as much time going Giorgio Moroder, who you may or may not know. He was kind of one of the inventors of disco in like 1976. She drives around LA to disco at like 3 a.m. She's just obsessed. Every moment could have the proper music and the proper soundtrack, and she just has to make it happen. So the music was incredibly key. This book wouldn't exist without its fundamental underlying soundtrack, which I think is on Spotify somewhere. Yeah.
I feel very similar about music. Like, there is a soundtrack for everything that I do. So I really felt Jada in that one. And yeah, tell us.
Yeah, I can't really write to music, but I feel like music definitely is throughout the novel. So I write a lot in coffee shops. And so I'm trying to remember what was playing when I was writing Blob. I think there was one coffee shop that would just play Phoebe Bridgers, just like on repeat, like the same like 3 songs. And then I also like to go to like really generic coffee shops sometimes. So I'd go to Brugger's Bagels, and it's just like Bruno Mars. And I just, yeah, I love like ambient people watching, typing. And one thing that really inspired the book, and there's a scene towards the end, is karaoke. I love myself a karaoke. You'll never see me turn down a karaoke. And my brother's friend in high school, he was doing a talent show, and he decided to sing the entirety of American Pie for the whole, like every verse.
Long song.
It's a very long song, and it's very repetitive, and he was so proud. And so I felt like that was pivotal for me, because I was trying to figure out, like, what is the most like self-assured thing you can do. And I think it's to karaoke a really long song. So that kind of marked the growth in my character a little bit.
What's your karaoke song?
I have a lot. I love myself some Alanis Morissette.
Yeah. Do you have a karaoke song?
Old Whitney Houston.
Okay, cool, great. Support that as well. We got a sign that we have 15 minutes left, so I'm gonna give it to any of y'all if you wanna ask some questions.
Thanks to both of you. Great to hear from you today. I started rewatching the show Gilmore Girls, and I've been very fascinated by the just like hundreds, it feels like, of Reddit threads and YouTube deep dives about how much mostly female watchers hate these female main characters called red flags. They have debates about which ones of them are worse. And it just seems like a weirdly internal reaction to messy characters who get happy endings. Do you guys ever experience that with people who've read your book, or is it mostly embracing the characters?
I don't read Goodreads comments because I'm scared.
That's
And I feel like everyone has a right to whatever response they want to have. But I can't, my partner was like, you can't, so.
I don't read the comments on any.
I am not a strong person, so I do peek over at Goodreads. But all I'm going to say about it is, yes, I've seen that, but everybody is entitled to their opinion. And to be honest, I used to think, oh, it's terrible when people don't like your characters. But let me tell you, my first book got Goodreads so hard. But it turned out that that was part of a really big discussion on things like what survivalism meant and like how Black people were doing it and lots of other things in the book. Basically, people hating your work is not necessarily the end of the world. Sometimes, the critiques, even though they're not necessarily things I'm going to like read and apply to my work, are fun to see. I mean, I didn't see things that way. And two, yeah, they can hate your book a lot, and it can still go out there to have a very nice life in the world and still be something you're proud of.
Sorry. Kashana, at the top of the discussion, you brought up that it was interesting timing that your book was released either 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after ICE was militarized all over the country. And there's two other interesting timings that I can think about. When Mary Shelley's first edition of Frankenstein was released in 1818, it was interesting. Benjamin Banneker, he was a free Black man living in America who wrote a very famous Farmer's Almanac. He received a letter from Thomas Jefferson complimenting him on how good his almanac was. And Benjamin Banneker basically wrote him a letter being like, thank you so much, please don't steal it from me. Also, while I have your attention, if you can recognize how brilliant I am, and you wrote the Constitution, you wrote saying that all men are created equal, why do you enslave people? And part of these letters were also sent while Thomas Jefferson was in France with a 14-year-old Sally Hemings, who would become pregnant during this trip. And he was basically sending these letters, there were a few exchanged, asking, Benjamin Banneker basically asking Thomas Jefferson to see the humanity in his complexion, was the word that he used. And it's very, very similar to the discussion that the creature has with his creator, Victor Frankenstein, in the book of like, you may see me as a person with humanity. And this was, Frankenstein was a hyperfixation of mine in grad school, or maybe a specialization is a better way to put it. And I always thought it was very interesting and like maybe a mood of the moment that these two people who had never met each other in living experiences were writing about the same thing. And then a couple of years ago, Dolan Perkins Valdez.
Can we get the question just because there's a there? Just try
Dolan
and.
Perkins Valdez wrote Take My Hand in 2022 or 23. Please forgive me, Dolan. She was my thesis advisor. And this was around the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned, and that book was about the Tuskegee sterilization of young Black girls and the Supreme Court cases that happened because of that. And that was also sort of an interesting timing. And I guess my question is, the responsibility of the writer, when things like this happen, do you think that, like these interesting timings, do you think that's human observance? Is that writers seeing and sort of collecting these overall human concerns and putting them in books and they're magically coming to fruition, or do you think it's a more concrete observance that's more common sense, especially kind of during this time when humanities and arts are constantly being questioned for their value and like their substance in our society?
I think writers are people who pay attention to the environments that we live in and incorporate a great deal of our modern day circumstances into our work, no matter when it's set. And so things like, oh, these are paramilitaries and they're totally comfortable harassing people out on the street is, I would consider, a natural extension of the American obsession with policing. I don't think I predicted anything in particular. I think I always look at modern day events and go, what if this rolled a little further? And that happened to happen, but to me, it's mostly an unhappy coincidence, more so than a deep session with an 8-ball and like, my psychic.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed both of your books, and one thing that I found both of them had in common was the sort of trauma bonding that comes with working an hourly wage job that maybe isn't your dream job. And I was curious, Kashana, you talked about working at JCPenney. I was curious if you had those relationships in previous jobs and how that came into your work.
Yeah, I worked at a hotel front desk. And much like working retail, you get to observe a lot of different types of people. People really treat hotels like their living room, and you get to see them at their best and their worst. And so, yeah, that relationship between Vi and Rachel, the coworkers, definitely came from that. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, all we had was, minimum wage plus commission on each other. And we would, at Penny's, we would go out clubbing together. I met everyone's partners. And then we would clean horrible things out of the fitting room. It was an experience that was hard to talk about to other people, and therefore it was really nice having this circle of overwhelmingly women to go through the crap together and then go out with together afterwards.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this talk. It really inspired me as a writer. I wanted to know about are you coming from as a business, from a business side, because you have interesting visions that seems like you would have to either fight for or fight with a publisher to achieve, especially for your second book. So I just want to know from debut and from second book, were there pressures, how to overcome them to get the vision that you wanted, or did your work just speak for itself and you just happen to have a good set of people behind you?
I really wish I had a more interesting story for you on that, but what really happened is my first novel sold through the roof, and then there was a bidding competition for the second one. And there was no convincing anyone of anything. I actually was like, are you guys gonna want a Burn the System Down book? Is this gonna be weird? And then a week later, there were 4 editors who wanted to talk. It was the easiest thing in my life. We went to auction, nobody wanted to question the vision. Everybody was like, maybe we would also like to burn things down. Sorry.
I love it. I was really lucky with my agent, Samantha Shea. She found one of my short stories, all the way back in 2017 when I was still in my MFA, and I would send her an email every few years and be like, okay, I have a new novel. Oh, no, just kidding. Okay, I have a new idea. Oh, no. And then I finally sent her Blob. And so she was really a great advocate for the book and helped me shape it. And so, yeah, hasn't been too much, I will say. A love story, the subtitle. I fought for maybe a few months on it because it's not quite a love story, but I've come to, it's a self-love story. I think it's a story about love, and I've come to, I think the cover makes it clear that it's not, a romance novel. I love romance novels, so I was like, I just don't want people to be confused, but I think that you don't see a Blob cover and think, this is gonna be a rom-com, hopefully. So that was the only thing that we kind of had a little bit of pushback on.
Hello, my name is Bria Coleman. Thank you both, all 3 of you, for being here. Haven't read your books, but they're both on my list. My question is for Kashana. 1, love the head wrap. 2, love fashion. 3, I peeped that 2L reference. I also am a lawyer, so, and being a lawyer kind of sucks, y'all, just in case you didn't know. So I was wondering kind of how did you do that transition over into, you know, the literary world? Because that's something I deeply want to do, and I'm trying to take advice from anybody I can.
I was always cheating on the practice of law with nighttime novels. So, like I was writing the whole time. And then I got to a weird like economic cycle in terms of practicing law, and my husband, who was very financially and emotionally supportive, I'm not gonna lie, was like, what if you just wrote? Like you've always written. What if you just kept going? And so I started submitting things, short stories to lit journals after that. And then those kind of got picked up, and I would execute these longer novel-like projects in the background. Like I just kept going. I had to really come to realizing that it was just gonna be a different style than the legal stuff at the first blush. But you know what's funny? Legal writing, you always have to make an argument. And arguably novels do too. There's an argument in every novel. The author is trying to convince you of a particular way of seeing the world. They may not be trying to convert you over to a political position or a legal position, but there's definitely a way of life that they're arguing for, or a journey that they want you to get some emotional investment in. I think I kept my emotions in it, I kept my connection to the idea of argument, and I just moved into, you know, more of what's in people's heads, as opposed to just the law and the strict interpretations of it. That's, yeah, how that worked. Good luck, by the way. I hope it works out for you.
Me too.
This is perfect timing because we have 2 minutes left, so you get to just go quick.
Thank you so much for everything. Just because your stories are very inspiring, hearing how you both conquered these sort of goalposts, both the debut and the sophomore, and also to your point about working with Roy Wood Jr. and doing something that you didn't expect. Is there a new writing dream that either of you look forward to, either impossibly or sincerely, as you continue your work?
I would love for Blob to be a movie. I'm going to put it out there. I would love for it to be a film. And yeah, I taught that screenwriting course that I was not qualified for. But I would love to actually learn screenwriting. And yeah, I think there's been some interest in it. So cross your fingers for me. I think, you know, films were always kind of in the back of my head when writing it. So I think it would be really special.
I would also like the Payback to be a movie. I am sitting on a script of it that I wrote. Let's see what happens with that. But I'd also just love to be one of those people where they just send all the funny books before they come out, the funny novels.
It's real. I think that we have a minute left. We just really, everyone did a great job here. Thank you both so much for flying to DC and talking to me. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor to get to talk to y'all and hear your stuff and to read your work. If you haven't read their books, go buy their books. They're probably downstairs for sale, I'd assume, right?
Yeah, because we're going to sign next.
Right,
Yeah.
there's a signing. Stay here, get your book signed. I am dumb and didn't bring mine. Is there anything you guys would like to wrap up with, or just should we walk off stage?
I think that's it.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.